Everything isn't beautiful because it lasts.
I am inevitable. And I am Iron Man. What a sweet-ass run it's been. Epic forces of darkness and light. What a world. Universe now.
Well, if that doesn't get you psyched up for what's about to take place, I can't imagine anything will. As you can imagine, there's a lot of ground to cover here. We're so lucky, so fortunate to have the men and women behind these movies here with us today to talk about their experience cutting the films. We know there's a lot you want to hear about, so we're going to try and make the most of this time and get started. Our host today, a man no stranger to the Marvel Universe, editor Jeff Ford, been behind the Avid for a great and many number of these films. And he's going to take things away for us and lead the discussion. And as I said, as you have questions, just submit them in the Q&A panel, and we'll just see how it all goes. Take it away, Mr. Ford.
Hey, Matt, thank you so much. This is really wild. This is kind of a first for us. We all, you know, a lot of us know each other. We see each other occasionally, but we're always very busy, and I think we don't always get a chance to get together. And this is a really interesting way to do it. But I think I should just start by saying, let's everybody, maybe we can everybody unmute your picture and sound, and let's get started. And we can go around and I can introduce everybody. And I'll try and hopefully I get everybody's name right and do it well. I'm going to go around my screen just so I don't forget anybody. But Michael Schar, great editor of Black Panther and many other pictures, but that's his Marvel Cinematic Universe contribution, an absolute masterpiece. Fred Raskin of Guardians of the Galaxy fame, as well as a number of other cinematic amazing masterpieces of late. Sabrina Plisco worked on Doctor Strange along with Wyatt Smith, who also worked on Doctor Strange and Thor: The Dark World. Lee Folsom Boyd recently edited Black Widow, which is still waiting to come out, and we're going to see it someday. Peter Elliott worked with that gentleman on Iron Man 3. Joel Negron, the great Ragnarok Thor sequel, amazing movie. Debbie Berman, Black Panther alum, as well as Captain Marvel. Dan Leventhal, the man who started it all with Iron Man 1, Iron Man 2. I could keep going. There's so many. Matt Schmidt, who I've worked with on a number of pictures, including the incredible iRobot many years ago. Just a little fun fact. Did I forget anybody in the panel? I think that's it. Okay, and Matt, Director Fury, thank you for putting this all together. It's really awesome. Listen, I want to make it a discussion, and when Matt asked about doing this, I wanted to. I said, "Can I ask the questions?" Because I got a whole bunch of them. So I guess I'm going to start at, actually, instead of starting at the beginning, I'm going to start with the recent production, and I want to ask Lee. You guys finished Black Widow. I wanted you to talk a little bit about what that experience like. I know you can't reveal any secrets. I'm not going to ask you to do that. But what was it like working on that? And also working on it in a time of COVID where everything was kind of, you guys were shaken up in post on that. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
Right. So Matt and I actually edited that together, and we were so close to finishing it when everything got shut down with COVID. And so obviously that put the brakes on us finishing. And so, like so many on the panel and out in the world, we had to work from home. And our wonderful Marvel IT worked around the clock to make that happen, along with the tech support and Avid, of course, just trying to fill in all the holes. And everyone learned a big dose of patience I think just because, I mean, what else are you going to do, right? And just trying to work interactively and figure it out and figure out what, what system worked and what we had in place. And so it was interesting, right, Matt? I mean, it was, we were successful in working with our executives and our director from our homes. And since we were so close to the end, there weren't a lot of things that we still needed to do, with the exception of our DI process, our final mix, which we did remotely. Disney allowed Matt and myself and our director, Kate Shortland, to go on to the Disney lot and work in the big stage, the sound stage A, so that we could interact with our sound department, who were all working from Skywalker Sound. So that worked so well. Just remotely, it was like we were in the room because they had control of the stage. So we were hearing everything they were doing in the sound environment that it was meant to be heard, which was a luxury. Matt, you want to chime in on anything?
Yeah, the process worked really well. I was surprised how well everything worked. It was weird, first I want the movie to get out there and the audiences to, to see it and appreciate it. That's a frustrating thing that, we keep on postponing. And I know everybody's excited to see it. And we're really excited about the movie. It was a great process. Working from home was a different thing. We're sitting in rooms like this and having 4 or 5 hour long phone conversations every day, trying to lock a picture during the pandemic. So it was interesting, and it worked, even though Marvel security wasn't happy about everybody working from home, which was another hoop that we had to kind of jump through. But yeah, overall, the process and everything, we logged into our Avids remotely from home. So we didn't have the movie with us, but we logged into Disney, and it was pretty seamless, especially as these shows are so big and just the amount of media and everything, technology wise. Yeah.
Totally. Well, that is a good point you bring up. I mean, these productions are massive. There's an enormous amount of material that's generated to make them, and they all, I mean, at least my experience on the ones I've done, it's so collaborative, and with COVID, it's so tough to get that collaboration going again. I think we're all kind of finding ways to do it, but now that we heard from you guys a little bit about like the latest, let's go back to the beginning, Dan, and I wanted to ask you were present at the creation of this studio with Iron Man 1. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about Marvel Studios has this incredibly crazy collaborative, environment where everybody's pitching and everybody fights over ideas and in a good way, and they argue and there's just a lot of conversations that go on in making these movies in post, and the movies really get made in post. And it seems like you had a hand in creating that environment, which has gone on to serve us so well. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your experience on the first Iron Man film and how your experience has changed over your time at Marvel, because I know you've done so many films.
Well, I think the mistakes I made, you'll all have had to pay for all along, with the fact that they need to actually be in and check. No stone goes unturned. We were kind of, at the time, I thought it was like a one thing, one picture kind of thing. I didn't know anything about any universes. And I thought, this'll do good. And then this craze will be over right then. And I didn't know that you guys are all gonna end up working on these things. But yeah, it was from the beginning, because Kevin Feige, who is our great leader, took over right as we were starting to shoot Iron Man, and he kind of lays the attitude of we fight to the bitter end, and everyone's ideas are important. So he'll stop, he'll really listen and consider, and that's infectious to everybody. So we all have learned to be great collaborators, because when the big boss is listening to everybody and listening to you, you want to then take that and listen all around. But we definitely were, I guess, charting some territory there.
For sure. Well, it is a thing that we always say here. I think there's these mottos that float around. They're not really mottos, but just the one approach is that you want to beat that movie up until the last minute. You want to really get every last, and Kevin calls it plussing. That's his term for getting stuff to be good at the end of the process. But the end of it used to be post was post. It's not anymore. Post is really post-production, production, and pre-production sort of happened simultaneously on Marvel movies. You're getting ready to reshoot or shoot or adjust, and so much editing occurs while we're in production. I think a lot of people are surprised when you say, oh yeah, we're cutting while we're in production. So I think
and to the end, right,
Jeff?
To the
last minute,
the bitter end. I remember in Iron Man, I was outraged because I used to think that the sound mix was sacred. Like, we had to be done. Now let's concentrate on this. And I'm like, I'm still cutting. This is crazy. And effects are flying in. Everything's happening at the same time. And like, I've never seen anything like this. You can't make movies like this. And 16 later, or however, 22.
That's exactly how we're going to be doing it every time. Well, I wanted to ask Fred, talk a little bit about how Guardians evolved during the editing process on that picture, because that was a completely new energy and tone for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that must have been really exciting to watch that grow.
I mean, it was. I have to credit James Gunn with all of that. I mean, it's really a complete product of his imagination. I mean, these characters existed prior to James getting his hands on them, but they really became James's. And the movie just completely reflects his sensibilities. But if you've seen the movies that he'd made before, which were, I believe, R-rated and unrated, he was kind of just allowed to go free. Here he had to have the constraints of the PG-13 rating, which I think actually made him a better filmmaker. I think that the comedy in those movies and the heart really just shines through. And I mean, it was a joy to work on. I have to be very honest. When I heard about the movie, I knew all I knew about it was that there was a talking raccoon and a walking tree in it, and I thought it was going to be the stupidest thing ever made. I was actually resistant to reading the script because I'd known James for a while. He actually wrote the second movie that I apprenticed on, and I was afraid to tell him, like, this is ridiculous. And then I read the script, and I got 30 pages in, and I was completely hooked. And by the end, I had a lump in my throat. And I called him immediately after I finished, and I was like, I'm in. Let's do this.
Did it change a lot in editing, or was it something? Did you guys discover the movie in post, or was it something that was on the page? Or both?
It was mostly on the page. I think we did. There were, as there are on most, if not all, of these movies, there was a period of additional shooting where we honed some of the story elements and added a little bit of comedy. But for the most part, it was there from the beginning. But the process of working with Kevin, Lou, and Victoria, kind of finding, throwing ideas back and forth, like the end tag in that first movie came out of one of those meetings. I mean, a lot of the ideas that happened in the additional shooting process came out of these meetings. So, I mean, you find it was neat for me because as an editor, I'm finding myself contributing to ideas that are happening in production, which is something that I'd never experienced before.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is one of the great aspects of working here. Is there's again, it's so chaotic sometimes, but it's also you can cross between the different worlds of post and production and so forth, and it's super exciting. Well, I want to ask Michael, can you talk a little bit about working with Ryan Coogler and what it's like, what the director-editor relationship is like on a Marvel movie?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Matt and Jeff for doing this. I'm here as a fan, and honestly, I have a little bit of imposter syndrome because honestly, Iron Man I think came out a few months before I packed up and moved out to California to go to film school. So it actually all of your work has helped me cultivate a taste and a skill, and thank you guys all for that. But yeah, so you know, Ryan and I went to film school together, and we had a relationship, and you know, our first feature was I slept in a closet. You know, I lived in Oakland with him, and we just worked, and we focused on emotion, we focused on, you know, storytelling and things like that. You know, and my job, the way I saw it working with him in our relationship was, I already knew how good he was, and I just needed to work and get better and keep trying. And then so when he got Black Panther, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified because, you know, how do we go? You know, we had done Creed and stuff, which was a bigger movie, but nothing like a Marvel movie. And you know, as a fan, you don't want to do those things wrong. This is a big opportunity. And you know, I think the, you know, kind of what Dan was saying, like you know, you guys all blaze the path, you know, for me, I feel like, and I think a lot of the things and the process that exists now that works, and even the openness of Marvel, you know, and I think there's an evolution to them doing things right and then being able to branch out and explore, and that in a lot of ways was what created the opportunity for Ryan and for myself. And so, you know, there's definitely a little bit of a risk taken on their part for people who've never done one of these before. And, you know, and you guys all know how much it comes with. And actually, Victoria, one of the executives, you know, had us, my first co-editor Claudia and I on Black Panther, when we went to Atlanta. You know, we got dinner with Jeff and Matt, and we sat down and on Marvel's dime, we had a great dinner, and just picked their brains and learned so much. And you know, there was such a level of supportive energy there, because knowing that they had gone through it and had gone through the trials and tribulations, and even knowing that no matter what they said to us at that point, we were going to go through it and have to experience it. You know, but one of the things they said was, you know, in so many words, you know, protect your director. Your director's there. You know, they believe in him. You know, you believe in him. There's a reason why you're here. They wouldn't trust you with the keys to this if they didn't believe that. You know, but don't be afraid to put yourself forward. You know, and I think a lot of also what they talked about was, you know, as an editor, we usually get a mound of clay that we have to make into something beautiful, right? No matter how weird the clay looks. With this, we're expected to have a whole new different kind of tool belt, right? You know, we have to be part of the writing side, the creative side. I mean, I'm looking around in a room of grown people playing with action figures. Like Black Panther would jump here, Black Panther would go here, and you know, as the kid who sat in the back of the class and didn't really say anything, that's kind of scary, you know. But that's supportive of you know, just go for things, try, you know, don't be afraid to fail. I think was a great lesson that, you know, that you guys taught. And you know, I remember at one point, you know, when I kind of let things get to me on Panther at one point. You know, I'll be completely honest. It was one of those late nights where up till 4 a.m. I'm telling Ryan to go take a nap so I can cut on something. You know, and it's us. It's not the studio's not making us do this. It's our love for, you know, and also feeling the responsibility of a movie like Black Panther, and always wanting to go the extra mile. You know, our relationship got stronger because, you know, we built on what we'd already established, and we had that trust. So, you know, I think another thing Victoria said was that this is all like having a baby, you know, and you got to be in it together, you know, and you have to, you know, with the co-editors, you know, and your whole team, but with, you know, the editors and director, you know, you're going to go through it. You're going to get mad at each other. You're going to have that creative friction. You're going to, you know, you might do this, but you're all together. You're all part of a team, and it's going to bring you closer together. And the great thing about Ryan is that he I mean, I've learned so much from him. The way he feels about his movies is that the people who make the movies are more important than the movies themselves. And so we would bring people from VFX, from the post-viz, when we would have a new cut of a scene. You know, that sort of family mentality got extended. That creative family mentality got extended, you know, throughout the dozens and dozens of people on our floor, right, on our crew. And so cool. And I mean, we even had a you know, one of our VFX PAs got called in and sat right next to Kevin and Victoria during a color session because she was from Korea, and we had a shot of Korea, and we're like, does this look too polluted? You know, and we brought her in. She didn't know what she was doing there, but you know, it's sort of that, you know, these movies have to be for everybody, and we all know it's going to go through us and go through the director, and that singular vision is what, you know, that uniqueness makes it universal. But it should represent, you know, most people, and I think his you know, and my job was just to protect that. And I know Debbie can also speak to you know, working with Ryan, and how selfless he is, but that's, you know, that relationship is so important, and you know, protecting the director was such great advice.
Well, you guys did, I mean, right back at you, because that movie is so, I look at that movie and that is a good example of how you can take risks. You know, that movie takes risks narratively, politically, everything about it is pushing envelopes every which way, and it succeeds in ways that, you know, it's so thrilling to see that. And I think you guys did, I mean, you knocked it out of the park on that one. I think it's so amazing. And really, really astonishing, even made now even more poignant by losing Chad. I mean, it's so, the future for that franchise is going to be really interesting to watch. It's so sad to know that he's not going to be there for it, but what a legacy that movie is. I want to ask Sabrina about performance and how, when you're cutting a movie that is that has a lot of technical visual effects, you know, crazy, insane narrative things, multiverses and sling rings and all these things, how do you approach performance editing on a movie like that?
Well, no matter what movie you're on, it's always about performance, whether it's a CG character or a live actor. So, I mean, we had, like many of these movies, we had just an abundance of riches with the actors involved. So you just approach it like anything else, and you have to set all the bells and whistles of what's going to happen around them aside, and just look in their eyes and look at their face and study their face and look deep inside and go with your gut on what they're exuding, just like in any performance movie. So you just learn to tunnel vision on their face and their performance. And try to set everything else aside, because all that other stuff is just going to embellish it and empower their performance.
Yeah, I often tell people, it's like, they ask about, like, is it different cutting a visual effects movie from a regular movie? I'm like, no, it's the same problems. It's storytelling, right? And do you feel like you calibrate your approach differently, or it sounds like you don't?
I don't when it comes to performance. I think you just have to judge what the visual effects around them might be. So, you know, you have to take that into account as you're cutting. So it's not just about their performance. It is going to be about what they're experiencing around them, which isn't always visible at first. So
Right.
You do have to understand and know that. And, you know, we all use the wonderful tools of previs and postvis to help us visualize things that are going on around our characters. But, you know, it all comes down to performance leads the charge. And then all that other pretty crazy stuff gets added, you know, after the fact.
Right. And let me ask Joelle, right, as a segue, the Korg in Ragnarok and performance capture, the way you were able to create this sort of incredibly organic performance of Taika for that rock, you know, he's a rock dude. I mean, he made a rocks and stuff. Like, the idea that you brought such nuance to that. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges in cutting motion capture performance work?
Yeah, it's well, Taika, for one, he's definitely a character. I mean, he is always performing, constantly performing. When he's on set directing, he's just out there. And in terms of his motion capture and his character, what really, he was just kind of, you know, riffing and ad-libbing, and, you know, he had the suit on. He would be directing with the suit on, which was really funny, you know. And, you know, we would just have miles and miles of, you know, dailies to go through, and we would just weed it down, find the pieces that were the funniest. First, find the pieces that were the funniest, that made us all laugh, and then we would make sure that it was integrated into the story as well, because there was, if you watch Ragnarok, some of his dialogue is really, you know, it's pushing the story forward and in a funny way, which is really, really great, and that's kind of what he does best. But it was hard because, you know, he was in a suit, and he had a little character with him that was kind of running around on the ground, and you're just visualizing what's going to happen, and yeah, it wasn't that difficult, because you know, he's there and you can kind of just visualize how he is, and then you just overlay the the previs on top of that, and then you just keep building on top of it and building on top of it. And
so did he work in a mocap suit with the actors on set in the actual set environments, or did you do motion capture later and then integrate
he was working on the set in the mocap.
On the set, okay.
With the actors, with Chris Hemsworth and with the other actors. And he, like I said, he's just a character. He's just really out there and really funny. And there was a lot of options, lots and lots of options. And it was good. It was good.
That movie has an amazing tone. It's so weird and fun and just crazy. I love it. I love it so much.
Well, with the tone, he was it was a lot more out there than, you know, Kevin Lou and Victoria had to rein him in a little bit. You know, his original idea was really wacky and really crazy, and you know, with all the characters, you know, with even Anthony Hopkins his original character was just, he was this hobo that was living in New York City that was all dirty, and just it was out there, completely out there. And that was really the fun part about doing the movie is you know, Taika had a vision, and you know, we were trying to keep that vision alive as long as we could, but also keep the whole Marvel world where it's supposed to be, you know, what you know, not make it too out there where people don't buy the characters anymore, you know, where people start to zone out on the characters because they're not really what they've grown to love, you know. So that was a little bit of a challenge to kind of just rein them in and make them funny and keep the movie. I always say it's a comedy. I always thought that Ragnarok was a comedy.
Oh yeah.
But we have to be true to the Marvel, you know, the rest of the series. And so that was challenging, and that was fun, you know.
It's a really great film. I wanted to ask Wyatt. So Wyatt, the sequence in Doctor Strange with the city folding and doing all the crazy
New York, yeah.
It's so bananas. Can you talk about when that sequence evolved, how do you get that to a place where you can shoot something like that? Can you talk a little bit about how that works? Because I know Marvel, I've done a lot of movies at Marvel, and we always really rely heavily on previs and storyboards and pre-production, like creating, and this is something that I think a lot of young filmmakers like really should learn about if they don't already. I'm probably dating myself because it seems like a new technique, but it's been around for a long time. But the idea of sketching out your product or your project before you do printable photography, like coming up with ways to anticipate what you need to shoot and laying that out in the Avid and using the Avid to build a sequence. Can you talk a little bit about that, how that sequence evolved?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, the first key step to that is kind of how we're all connected in different ways in this. Is like, I worked on Thor: The Dark World with Dan. I cut Doctor Strange with Sabrina, and you came in the 11th hour with incredible ideas and perspective. But the fact of the matter is we're collaborating with each other beyond all the other departments and all of our assistants who we also have communally amongst a lot of our films. It's the amount we work together. So on a case of Doctor Strange, which is, you know, we were trying to push such a visual boundary, and it, you know, I believe Banana Town, to borrow your term, Jeff, was thrown around a lot in just trying to describe how these sequences work. And, you know, because that was also the core of this weird 60s psychedelic character. But the great thing was to have someone like Sabrina there with me the entire time, because as footage is starting to come in, she's starting to do her work. The fact of the matter is on Doctor Strange, the whole time we were filming, there were scenes that we were both doing passes of, scenes that I was doing on my own, scenes Sabrina was doing on her own, but I was cutting previs the entire film. The very last sequence we shot was the Hong Kong sequence. And I think I got a sign off on the previs the night before they started filming it, and that was the very end of production. So aside from all the technical aspects of how to figure all that out, it is interesting that we basically had two edits of a movie running at once. I was running a previs edit while the actual production was going on, and Sabrina was running that edit, but then constantly communicating with each other and looking at each other's work. A sequence like New York, the hard thing with these crazy visual things is you have all this previs to plan everything out, but the most important thing, you're basically making a video game of your movie. But what is so essential is, where are the actors in it? Right. And more and more the feature editors are getting involved in previs because, and this is no disrespect to previs editors, but a lot of times they're not looking at it from that character story perspective. A lot of times you're looking at previs and they don't bother putting in close-ups because, there'll be actor close-ups, of course, but you're trying to figure out these scenes and trying to figure out what length they are and how they function. And you need to be representing how the actors are going to be involved, because most importantly, you can't have a sequence where it's like, we know we can do anything in CG, but you have to have real actors to make these things work.
That's a great point. And they're going to ask too, like Benedict Cumberbatch is going to ask, what am I doing here? And the director has that, now can explain, well, when we're done, which will be months and months and months from now, this is when you go like this, it's going to do this.
Right, and you end up in these meetings with the production designers and the costumers and everything, right. and you're breaking down everything shot by shot in these methodologies. So it's an interesting role for an editor to be in, because ultimately, once you've got the previs done and the real footage from it comes in, you have to forget everything that you've done and start to look at it for all those weird little idiosyncratic things that actors do that's human, and not just the way we designed it and programmed the sequence to be. Totally. So and Marvel lives so much in that world of previs, because it is so complicated.
Right. Well, Dan, did you guys do animatics on Iron Man 1?
Yeah, we had some, not as sophisticated as it ultimately became, and Jon Favreau, the great Jon Favreau, hated his animatics, and so, but without them, there's no, not just a map, there's no way to budget anything. Yeah, I mean, it's a tool to figure out everything, and there was a major sequence in Iron Man that he hated it, and so they went and winged it, and it was a disaster. It didn't make the film. We ended up reshooting the mid action piece. So I think now everyone is like, yeah, let's get it right as you can, and then throw it away later, and we'll all start again.
And similarly to that, there was a moment the first time we ever go through. You mentioned sling rings, Jeff. This whole time, first time they go into a mirror dimension through these sling ring things, we had this room of brilliant people. Steph Soretti, our visual effects supervisor, multiple Oscar nominee, and we had this amazing transition planned. And we looked at it for weeks and weeks and weeks, born out of Scott Derrickson, our director, and we couldn't figure out how to film it. And ultimately, we kind of had a plan, but it would be 2, maybe 3 different days to figure out the motion control of it. And ultimately, it's just like, because you can't do it digitally and it has to be human, it's such an important moment, we had to scrap it and come up with something else. And it's fascinating that you hit that limit of what's possible.
Well, you always end up having to support the actors in the best way. That is your limiting factor, because that's what the audience is really connecting to, is those emotional things, because that's, human beings are the relatable part of these stories. That's why I think the Marvel films resonate, because there's always a human component to the stories that's relatable, even though they're in these fantastical contexts. But that's a really interesting point that you make, which is that ultimately it is the actor that we're serving with this. Even in the pre-visualization, even though it creates these incredible visuals, it's really to support storytelling from an acting point of view.
Can I jump in and add one thing that about the New York sequence you guys are talking about? That is one that took a long time to figure out what was going, like there was previs, but it was a really complicated sequence, and it took a long time for everybody to figure out what was going to happen behind them in that world. And there was a lot of experimentation, and we just started talking one day, and I have this beautiful glass kaleidoscope that I brought in one day, and somebody mentioned a prism, so I brought this tool in, and we're all like little kids looking through the glass kaleidoscope, and that sort of was a spark of an idea that became this world, kaleidoscope world caving in. So ideas can come from anything, even kids' toys. So it's fun, but sometimes, like Wyatt said, you plan and plan and plan, and it doesn't quite live up to what everybody wants it to be. So it's
Right.
that constant search for how to make things better.
Right. Well, I want to ask a question. I want to ask Debbie about these movies are so I find them to be like sometimes overwhelming in terms of how much has to be done in the amount of time that we have to do them. Because I feel like we make a movie that would take 3 years to make, we make it in a year kind of thing. So just, I want to know, like, you've done 3 Marvel films and they're all really, but all 3 of them were kind of like character introduction movies where you were laying down, you know, the framework for movies that would have a continuing storyline. What is it? How do you approach prioritization when you're working on a movie and dailies are rolling in and you're in production and the director needs something and visual effects need something? How do you balance your creative work with the sort of crazy, relentless technical demands of the job?
What happened to the softball questions?
Oh, I wanted to ask you this one because I know you'll have a good answer to it.
No, I mean,
and I want to know because I can't manage my life.
Well, I think one of the key things I've learned as an editor for creative and technical processes is to know the importance of the long game. So you don't always have to win your battle on that day. And so creatively, if you're in love with an idea, you don't have to convince everyone the first time you show it to them. You can lose the battle on that day and then slowly convince people over time. And it's the same with priorities, realizing, yes, I'm really excited about this new scene and I want to cut it, but that's the beauty of editing is I can push it aside and what the priority now is set. And so you just have to set yourself up to succeed long-term by approaching what is the most immediate fire, I guess. But I get with, you know, there are some really long, complicated technical or visual effects scenes, and sometimes I'll just chip away at them a little every day so that you don't become bogged down by this sort of 10-minute massive action sequence and just get lost in it. Like I find them freshest in the morning, so chip away at it and then maybe move on to something, you know, simpler in the afternoon. But I think it's reactionary. Editors are in general reactionary in its reactionary role, and it's about communicating with the crew and the directors and just trying to figure out what is actually important and what will help the film long term and what is someone sort of just wanting to do, and that's something you could chip away at later.
Right. Right. Do you show cuts to the director right away after you finish them, or do you like work on them for a bit and then show them? Or is it different for every director?
You know, it's definitely been different for every film. On Spidey, John came once, right? We couldn't get him to editorial. I ended up sending him like a fun little Evite just to get him to come visit us. Will you please join us? And then we finally got him in one time, but he wanted to focus on shooting. And we're like, well, that's, you know, I mean, Dan, as you know, is the legend. It's like, we've got it. Well, he's got it. I'm learning from him. But we saw him that one time with the Evite. And then when he was finished shooting, we jumped into director's cut. The Rhino wasn't on while they were shooting, actually. So Mike would be able to answer that one. I joined the film later.
We came in later, right?
And then Captain Marvel, one of the directors used to be an editor. So editing was actually her safe place. So we saw them at least once a week, and they would pop by all the time, and that's where sort of she found her calm and the ability to sort of see how things were coming together. The one thing I've learned from the past is I really don't like uploading cuts, because once they're out there and a director can say it's just for me, I won't show anyone, you can safely assume the lead actor, the head of the studio, and their like entire family will see that cut. So I'm very protective. I try not upload things because they're in a rougher stage and they're vulnerable, and the film is still vulnerable, and you don't want people to get worried about something, you know. So if a director wants to see something, I'm like, come on in anytime. I'll meet you on the weekend. I'll meet you late at night, but I'm not uploading anything to protect you and to protect the work, and also to protect the film so that people don't start spinning.
Right, right, absolutely. Well, I want to ask Peter, comedy in the Marvel films, and by the way, I have to credit Dan again for this, because the balance of comedy to action and the sort of invocation of Downey rhythms and things into these movies came from the first Iron Man film. But Peter, you and I worked on Iron Man 3. I wanted to talk a little bit, if you could, about balancing comedy and action, because you did some amazing work in this final I don't even want to, if I mention it, we're all going to get PTSD about the seaport sequence, but you did such great work. But how do you, in an action picture or a Marvel movie action, anything that has like a cross genre thing, how do you balance comedy and action?
Well, for me, it's the characters are, especially Robert's character, is so grounded in his humor that if you have to sort of lead with that a little bit. And I think that's one of the great things that Marvel's done throughout much of the universe, is that it sort of has weaved in the comedy. And I think that's what's kept it fresh and kept people wanting to keep watching. Is not, I mean, sure, the action set pieces are huge, and we destroy things and things go, get crazy, but it's more about the character stuff that people are drawn to and tune into these films about. And so, like I said, Robert's character is so sort of grounded in comedy that to cut that out or leave that aside would be like, wouldn't be a good thing for his character. And, in that movie, half the movie, he wasn't in his suit. So, it was really more about his character and not so much about Iron Man. I mean, clearly it was an Iron Man movie, but it was more about Robert's character.
Do you know if a joke is playing in the edit room, or do you have to get it to a preview to tell?
Well, previews help, but I think like a lot of us, some things are funny to us and some things aren't funny to other people. And, I find myself laughing at a lot of things, and then we'll test it and we'll go, oh, well, that wasn't funny, or that didn't land. And sometimes it's about how the joke is constructed. Right. And sometimes it's just not funny to people. And I find that in a lot of the comedies that I work on, and which is cutting a comedy right now during COVID even harder, because, being able to screen a movie in front of an audience, a theater full of, an audience is paramount to sort of telling how the jokes are landing. Because, I'll go to previews and just watch the audience. I don't even watch the movie anymore, because at that point I've already seen the movie enough to I could just hear it and know what's going on. I don't need to look. So I tend to watch the audience and see how they're reacting.
Right. That makes a huge difference. And that's another thing. It's like so tough right now. Collaboration is harder because of this. Because we can't a preview is such a huge tool for any filmmaker to find out where things are going. Even if you do it with friends and family, kind of informal, it doesn't have to be a recruited thing. Just getting people together to vibe on something is so important.
And certainly the comedy aspect of it is huge, because, with a room full of people, laughter is contagious, and it you could tell right away if a joke lands or not. And
right.
When you're showing it to the same 8 people and they're on their 50th viewing, well, they're not going to probably laugh at that joke again, because they've already watched it 49 other times.
That's true. That's true. You get burned on it. Wow, this is amazing. Well, let me ask. I'm going to ask one question to the group, which is and anybody can raise their hand and answer if they want to. But what do you think's what's the misconception that people have about editing a Marvel movie? What's the thing that people, if somebody said, it's amazing, it's a fantastic job, it's so great, everything's fantastic, what is something that they might not know that would surprise them?
That everything's not planned out ahead of time.
That's a good one.
It all seems like this one big universe, and Kevin has this idea and it all comes together. A lot of it's just, trial and error and kind of winging it, and everybody coming up with ideas that tie back to another movie. And
but I think it's like, but painting ourselves into the corner is sometimes where the best ideas come from, because you go, we're stuck, what do we do? And then you go, wait a minute. And then that becomes like one of the best things. So you're totally right.
I think also that's one of the great things about working with Marvel and Lou and Kevin and Victoria, is that they tend to let the movie evolve, and they watch it and go, well, that maybe we need to do this here. Or like you remember on Iron Man 3, it felt like we pretty much never stopped shooting. Right. Because we were, it was just like we were in production the whole time.
We were, yeah, because Robert broke his ankle, and so we had to wait. Like we were cutting it for a little bit, and then we were shooting it. Yeah, but everything's on the table all the time. I think that's exactly a good misconception, is that we finish.
Yeah, there's no finishing. They sort of take the movie away from you when they want you to be done.
Yeah,
you're not really done. You just run out of time.
I like to say that these movies are like IKEA furniture that, you start to build it and you find yourself with all these other pieces. They don't work. It doesn't fit together right. And sorry, IKEA, but yeah, and that also there are a lot of things that didn't work, and people think it would be everything is great out of the box. It's just not true. It's a lot of things have to be redesigned.
Yeah, or there's the scenes people say, why wasn't that deleted scene and it's amazing? It's like, no, it's not. It's not. It's not amazing.
Well, I mean, it is truly the last time you get to write the script. So you write the script, then you shoot the script, and then you cut the script, and it's the third and final time.
I feel like on the movie that I did, we were constantly developing, constantly writing, constantly shooting, constantly editing different versions of the movie. I think I had 30, 40 different versions of the entire film.
That's amazing. I mean, that is sort of a message, though. It's like filmmaking is this ongoing kind of struggle that you keep pushing, even though, and it's incremental, but it is true.
And we had that.
I think people would be surprised by what deep dives we do into talking about character. I think there's a misconception that these are more sort of action-based movies, and the hours and hours we've spent like examining and analyzing characters and their relationships to each other. That was something I wasn't expecting, and I loved, and I think it comes from a place that the whole crew are movie fans, and we love movies, and we love good stories with good characters. So I think that would be a surprising fact.
And I'm sure you guys had those boards, with the scenes on them that they had, with the magnetic.
Oh yeah, we do those in every movie.
Yeah, every day someone would come in and then move a few around, move this one here, that one there. Well,
what he's talking about is we put up these big boards with a little picture of each scene, and then you can look at the whole run of the movie like on one big on the wall, and you can start moving stuff around before you go into the Avid to move it around. So basically you have this, it allows and Kevin liked it because you can kind of step back and go, okay, where are our problem areas? How's our structure looking? It's an interesting way to think about the movie.
I had to fight for that board.
Well, they're now the standard operating procedure around here, Dan.
Oh, yeah. I don't do a movie without them now.
They're great. They're really helpful.
Yeah. I'm just happy they're not Velcro anymore, because that used to just be painful to sit for the rearranging. You would just
Little known fact: some of the editors here, such as Wyatt Smith, have had to direct scenes in these movies.
Never happened.
Wyatt had to fly to England to direct some of the shots because we were shooting all over the world on the Thor.
Because our director was in Hong Kong at the time.
That's right. I'm shocked to hear
Shooting
that.
a different actor.
I can't believe that sort of thing goes on. I've never.
I'm sure you've never done that, Jeff.
Never would never do that.
He's lying.
It's whatever it takes.
Jeff's favorite place is the mocap stage.
Oh my God, kill me now. No, it's fun. It's good. Well, the thing is, sometimes there's 3 units going. I don't know if you guys, or 2, or at least 2, but sometimes 3, sometimes 4. That's the other crazy thing people don't realize. They're like, well, you get dailies, right? And you watch dailies and then you break it down. I'm like, yeah, well, there's dailies from main unit, then there's splinter, then there's second unit, then there's mocap, and then maybe there's even a plate unit going, and that's all flowing in all the time. So that's the other where it's like, wait a minute, that degree of difficulty just went way up.
And also,
you have to realize when you have
time as well. The previous
What's that?
all the time as well.
Yeah, previous too. Yeah, there's a whole nother movie going, like Wyatt was saying.
And you have to help, and this is helping the director. You keep your director focused on main unit. And of course, you've got your second unit director, who on Marvel films is often your stunt director as well, which is very helpful. But then you do get these other units, and it's like they can't fly blind. So a lot of times when they're shooting through programs like QTake and stuff, I'll have an iPad set up right in front of my console. So even while I'm cutting, I'm watching what they're shooting, and they'll call and be like, so we're getting that hand grabbing the thing, and I'm looking at the scene, or I'm looking at Sabrina's cut in the scene. Is it the right angle? Is it the right thing? It's amazing the level that you're just interacting with constantly on this movie.
Yep.
And re-recording of actors, sometimes we're the ones sent in to do that, the director. Sometimes it's also for political reasons. Like I remember having to do Downey because he and Favreau weren't getting along at that. And so they sent me in, and he'd say no at that point to anything the director wanted. And at that point I'd say, I'm just the editor. Could you please, I don't want to get in trouble.
It's always great
The
when
thing
they
about-
say, yeah, I don't want to say that.
But the thing about Danny though, the thing about Danny is he'll do a loop and he'll be like, that was perfect. And I'll be like, I think, can we do another one? He's like, it was perfect. And I'm like, I really think we could do one more. And he's like, you're right. But he's testing you. He'll test you 2 times before he'll go ahead and do the one. But the best one ever was I was looping with Sam Jackson and I said, he finished the loop and I said, Sam, that was perfect. Can we just do one more? He looks at me, stares at me, and he goes, perfect. Well, that's pretty good. I'm like, I'm not getting another one. It's not going to happen. But yeah, we get sent in to do that once in a while. And I also think that's part of that, by the way, that's part of the process of rethinking the movie, sound, ADR, all that music, everything that happens in that later phase is also, that's the stuff that's all going on at the same time as we're finishing the movie as well. So I guess my misconception to people, and we've all aired it here in this, was that the movie is like, everything is open to discussion, and slowly it's sort of the cement starts to set as you finish, but it's open to discussion and change so late in the process that it can be really dizzying. But it's also kind of exhilarating and fun.
And yet somehow it always comes down to that 11th hour.
Yeah. No,
I mean,
am I alone, or did you all have films where you really just hit that perfect point?
No. Or the 12th hour. I remember Avengers, Jeff cutting the tag scene after the premiere of the movie on the back of a truck bed on a laptop
on
cutting
Pico.
the shawarma scene on Pico, cutting the shawarma scene for the tag for the movie. After the premiere, it was the only time we could get the cast together.
They shot it after the premiere, right?
Yeah, we shot it after the premiere, so it didn't make the international release, but it made the domestic because they just slapped it into the DCP at the lab as it went out. It was crazy. But that's the only time we could get everybody together. Yeah, and Evans had a beard, so they made this prosthetic to cover his beard because he was going to be like this at the table just to cover it, but he had a beard for another part and he looked like Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm like, we're doing Marvel Zombies. No, but it was the weirdest night because it was like, it was one shot, so it wasn't exactly the most intense editing, but yeah.
But they're never done.
No, never finished. Wow, this has been amazing. Did anybody else have anything they want to talk about and say? I will open it up. We have a few minutes, and I'd love to hear if you guys have anything you want to.
Well, I'd like to ask Jeff Ford a question.
Sure.
You seem to have been the master at these ones that assemble all these characters that we do individually into cohesive, the big team ones, And I do remember saying to myself after Iron Man 1 and 2, it's like, how are they going to mix these things? This guy's science, this guy's magic. Well, you did. So how do you approach these things?
Oh, well, I've benefited from working with Joss and the Russos on the Avengers movies because they were those directors were, and Joss as a writer was so good at balancing. And I think that was already present in the script. And then I would say that our task on those movies, Lisa and I and Matt and I, was to keep that balance and make sure that we were, respecting the way that the story evolved and making sure that everybody did have their voice. But I would say those movies aren't achieved without an incredible degree of precision in the writing and the directing in terms of what you're saying about balance, because it's a really tough thing to mix them, as you're saying, because they are different worlds. And the best writing that Joss did and that Marcus and McFeely did is that it's when those worlds were coming together and colliding. So like, for instance, Thor talking to Star-Lord about his deep voice, like that's the stuff where you go, oh my God, you could only have that beat because these two worlds were coming together and being so strange. Or Rocket hanging out on Earth and stuff like that. It's just so nuts. But that's when it gets really weird, but it's also when it gets really good. Well, this has been super fun. Matt, do we have any questions
yeah, we have a lot of questions.
Do you want to take a few, or should we keep going?
If everybody's got time, take a few. I mean, many of them you've touched on already throughout your answers. A lot of them have similar threads going through them. I'm just going to try and synthesize a couple together and ask, and you kind of touched on this, Jeff, and you were talking to Dan and Debbie about world building. And, you know, you asked Dan about Iron Man, and he said, well, there was no universe yet. I was just working on Iron Man. There is a narrative thread that goes throughout all these films, and yet you're working independently a lot of times on these projects. So how do you go back, and if you're working on a film that's following up the previous Marvel film, will you connect with that editor? Will you talk to them about, okay, so what were you going for with, you know, Downey, the character of Iron Man here, or Captain America here? Like, is there some discussion that goes on amongst all of you between these films? And anybody can take that.
I'd say no. I think we enjoy leaving the next editor with a real problem to solve.
Well, I do. We will gossip about what's going on. Like if we have movies that are going at the same time, sometimes it's like you'll say, "Hey, what's going on with yours?" Because this is we're doing this and we're doing. So there's a little bit of that, but not, remember, a lot of the movies aren't going at the same time. They're being shot or cut at different intervals. I will say that Kevin, over the course of the process, has gotten really good at managing that. And then there's a team of people. There's the whole Marvel creative executives, you know, team like Stephen Broussard and Nate Moore and all those people who are just so good at remembering, understanding, and now that as this stuff's accumulated story-wise, the arc it is guided to some extent. So some of that stuff has to be respected, timelines and references and when things happen. That all has been now, that's starting to be charted in a way that's done. And so there's a team of people that works on the movies that help us, you know, to some extent. But again, remember, like we were shooting Captain Marvel for Endgame before Debbie was getting footage of Captain Marvel for the Captain Marvel movie. So it's like, just because of the vagaries of the schedules, it's like, and then we had to go back and adjust, and, you know, things change. Cause then, on the Captain Marvel movie, her character was different slightly than where we put her. Cause Brie was still discovering the character. So a lot of this is just, you have to kind of have to pivot with it. You know, it's what happens.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we've always, sort of held on to is every film should be able to play as a standalone film.
Yeah.
So if someone's never seen a Marvel film before and is never going to see another one, the film will still make sense and still be like emotionally effective, and the narrative will work. And I've always found the interconnective tissue is more like texture. It can't break the film, it can add to it, but the film also needs to work without it. And as Jeff said, we do have sort of gatekeepers to that who are looking at the big picture. I mean, we don't even necessarily know what's going on with our characters in other films. Well, we're sort of on a need to know basis.
And it evolves so fast that they may not know yet either.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe we'll see if this takes a little while to get through, but I'd like to ask a question that everybody can have an opportunity to answer before we close things out. And that would be, throughout all the films that you've done for Marvel, whether it's 1 or 8, is there a particular scene that you're most proud of, that you would best represents your work, or there was something about it that was challenging and you really knocked it out of the park? What one scene do you really hang your hat on from the Marvel movies you've done? And I guess, Jeff, you want to start, and we'll go across the grid?
Oh, sure. Boy, that's a really tough question to ask.
That was the softball.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm going to say there are 2. I can't get it to just one, but I can do 2. The first one is Stanley Tucci talking to Steve Rogers the night before he goes into the chamber to become Captain America. And there's a scene where Stanley Tucci explains to him that, you know, why it's important to be a good man and why he was chosen to be Captain America. And I think that was one of the first scenes that I cut when I came to Marvel. And it's sort of the essence of Steve Rogers' character. So that means a lot to me. And I think Tucci's mind blowing in the scene, as is Evans. So it's a really special scene. And whenever I see it, it just sort of is one of those, it feels just like, you know, the prime sort of superhero storytelling and why we come to these films. And then the other one would be Tony's death in Endgame, which is spoiler, which is with him and Pepper, that moment. Cause it's super delicate, and it's a deceptively difficult thing to stay in a tone and be respectful of what's going on, feel realistic, and still be in this crazy fantasy universe with Gwyneth in her outfit and Robert doing his thing. So anyway, those 2 are the ones that they're most meaningful to me emotionally.
And Mr. Raskin?
It's in the first Guardians, the 12% of a plan scene where the team is sitting around in a circle figuring out what they're going to do, just because it's all of these characters come out, and of course 2 of them weren't actually there on set, like they're full CG. So having that all come together as well as it did, and that was one that also James shot. I think it was his first time shooting like 4 cameras. There was 12 hours of footage for what is ultimately a 4-minute long scene. I couldn't be more proud of how well that came together. I just think it's really funny, and it's got a lot of heart, and it gets the third act of the movie going.
Cool. Well, Peter, we're probably going to get to you last, so you have the most time to really think about this. So you got to knock it out of the park, okay? Sabrina.
I've just done Doctor Strange. So for me, I think it was the Hong Kong sequence, because it was so complex and so many layers upon layers of how to plan to shoot that and how they shot it and how we had to put it together. So the foreground and the background, and the set was just gorgeous. And I got to go down to the set every night. I was left with the second unit team for a month after Wyatt and the director got to go back to LA to get started on the rest of the movie. But because I was such an integral part of the shooting, and just putting that together, and it just was so massive. I just love the texture of that scene.
And Wyatt?
I think I'll go with Strange as well. I mean, just a quick backstory to it is, when I first worked on Thor: The Dark World and came into Marvel to work with Dan, I'm a comic book kid. I still have 5,000 comics at home, probably 95% Marvel, probably everything before 1980. I mean, it was my heart and soul as a kid. So I had only been at Marvel, I think, my second week. So I'd met Kevin Feige once. And even in my second week, I asked him, when are you going to make a Doctor Strange movie? Years and years before Doctor Strange was made. So thankfully, it did put me in the running for when they finally did, because I consistently, I think every 3-6 months, I would send an email being like, when's that happening? When are you going to make a Doctor Strange? And then finally they did. So early in the shooting was it was the introduction to the Ancient One, Tilda Swinton's character. And it's a beautiful set by Charlie Wood, and it's an all practical scene where you have this very hot-headed but now kind of dilapidated and disheveled Doctor Strange, Benedict Cumberbatch, and you had Tilda Swinton, who's just this epitome of cool but with such an oddness to her. And there was just such an insane fanboy moment to me to cut that scene where they meet for the first time, and come from such completely different, there's such a clash between the 2 of them there that never really clashes in the same way. They start to see eye to eye after that. And oddly enough, for as much as that movie went through its paces, and it's a big scene, it barely changed. From how I first presented it with Scott, and then how we worked on it together a bit, and then it really actually lived, whereas just about everything else in that movie went through so much. So that was probably the scene for me.
Cool. Joel?
I agree with Jeff. That's a really hard question. I mean, I just did Ragnarok, but I can tell you which scene I had the most fun cutting, which was the immigrant song in the beginning of the movie. And, his Thor's fight with Surtur, that was just a blast to cut that, because we put the immigrant song in, and Taika said, just make it a music video. And I just had so much fun. I love Led Zeppelin. I always wanted to put a Led Zeppelin song in a movie. I never got to, and this was great. And then when we got to do it a second time in the third act, I mean, that was a total blast. The same thing again, just take the scene, make it fun, make it actiony, but here, cut it to the immigrant song. And I was like, yes, that was so much fun.
I love Zeppelin too. Debbie?
It is a tough one. I'll take it down to 2. The first would be on Spidey, and this is kind of for personal reasons. I had lesser credits when I joined the Marvel Universe. I just basically harassed my way in there. And I think people were pretty unsure of me, and I was just waiting to get fired. And then they shot this car scene with Spidey and Ned, and there was no structure to it. It was just like hours and hours of second unit footage of Tom driving and ad-libbing, and Ned was ad-libbing, and Jon Favreau was ad-libbing, and was just a mess of footage. And Dan was like, yeah, you deal with this. And I actually love that kind of stuff. So I constructed the scene and I showed it to Dan, and I actually think he breathed a visible sigh of relief, like, oh, okay. And there was something about it that just worked, and it never really changed. That's pretty much the first cut. And it was that moment, I think, where I thought I'd proved myself and look, I can do this. And at that point, people started joking about firing me, which is when I knew I was okay, because I'm like, well, if they're joking about firing me, they're probably not going to. And the other one would also, funny enough, be Spidey, even though Black Panther is my soul movie. But I'd heard that Kevin Feige had always tried to get Spidey lifting the rubble into a movie. And it was like, they'll often have a piece of concept art that they are in love with and want to try work into the film. And I knew that had been very dear to his heart for many, many years. So I had a huge printout of Spidey lifting the rubble in my edit suite. And again, that was just a ton of footage with no real structure dumped on my lap, and I was delighted. And I think that scene worked really powerfully, and it's a great emotional moment for Spidey. So.
And Dan, when you're not handing it off to Debbie, what's your favorite?
This is a cruel question. A cruel.
I only ask the cruel ones.
Which child do you like the best of yours? Very cruel question. But I'll pick a couple. One, a comedy scene from the movie Ant-Man, where Luis is trying to explain to Scott Lang who that this guy Hank Pym, and it does this crazy sweepy thing that we first built as a radio cut because it had to go like bop, 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 and then actually shot to the cut of him speaking. So it's shot the rest of it. That was so much fun, and the audience couldn't get enough, so that after we first showed people, we decided to shoot another to end the film. And then the other one, this is really hard to get the second, but I'm going to go to that Spidey movie too, the Far From Home, and it's a sort of a two-scene scene, which is when he finds out that his girlfriend's father is actually, Michael Keaton is the bad guy. And I love this scene, and I love the combining it with the next one where they're driving, because when I went to the day the movie opened at the theater, like I like to do, sneak in and see what real people think, not like premiere people. When that scene happened, there was this gigantic gasp from the audience, and then 3 seconds later, a round of applause. So they missed the scene because they were so, strucken. But then what follows is a very, very, very precise scene where the bad guy's figuring it out. So I love those two. And then I have about 12 more. But anyway.
Actually, can I jump in on that? Because I remember this was one of Dan. I used to force him to give me master classes in editing. I remember that scene in the car where Michael Keaton is figuring out that, that Peter Parker is Spidey. And actually in the script, he figures it out really soon into the scene. It's almost immediate. And Dan was, saying, no, that takes all the tension out of the scene. It's about the slow play. And it was about this balancing act that Dan did of like, when is the moment that he gets it, and how do you show it? And is it a look? And is it, the rear view shot? And it's such an example of how editing can, be the third rewrite, where initially was written, he's suspicious right off the bat. And then it's such a tense and effective scene. So.
Well, excellent answers to a hard question. Mr. Schmidt?
Very hard question. Because there's so many, but I'm going to take it down to one that's interesting. When we shot Infinity War and Endgame, we shot them back to back. And initially, the beginning of Endgame with Hawkeye on the farm with his family and his daughter shooting arrows, and they're having a picnic, and that used to be, originally it was scripted for Infinity War at the end of it. And so we moved that scene early on in the process. We cut the scene, we watched, it was a great scene, and then we figured out kind of maybe it wouldn't work at the ending of Infinity War. And so we decided to move it to the head of Endgame to set the stage, set the tone of kind of how the movie was going to start and kind of play out. The scene changed, instead of being at the end of the movie, we changed it a little bit. We took our time with it for the beginning of Endgame. But just to see the heartbreaking loss and kind of set the how Endgame was going to play out was really interesting to kind of, and that's the thing with these movies, they're always changing. I mean, granted, that went from one movie to another movie, which you usually don't do, but you're always thinking of options and always thinking of places, to plus it, to enhance the storytelling, because that's one thing with Marvel, it always comes down to storytelling and characters, and they're big spectacles, but at the heart of it, it's like one big family. And that's what makes these movies work so well, that people go to the movies and they see these characters that they've seen film after film, and starting Endgame with his family kind of disappearing, really kind of set what the movie was going to kind of be about.
Excellent. And Lee?
Okay, so I guess I have a special place for Spider-Man, and it's not because the scene is technically difficult or anything like that. I just think the emotional payoff is nice, and it's when in Far From Home, when Spider-Man and MJ kiss on the bridge after the Mysterio battle and everything, and it's just satisfying to me personally, just because for the character arc for both of them, and it's Peter had to grow up in the previous scene, like he had to kind of stand on his own 2 feet in the story arc, and so I just they have that personal moment of, and he's gone through so much leading up to it. So
terrific. And Michael?
Yeah, so I'll pick 2, I guess, that kind of have the same thing. So originally in Black Panther, the opening scene in Oakland was actually about 7 minutes long, and we were kind of working against the grain a little bit from other Marvel movies in a few ways. We may be the only Marvel movie where our hero doesn't quip or make jokes, so we have to move that comedy to other people and have it kind of go towards him, because T'Challa never really made a joke about anything. He sort of took things in. He was a very kind of internal character. We leaned on his people. But our first scene was about 7 or 8 minutes long. So right off the bat, we're not starting with action. We're starting with dialogue. And we called it taking your medicine, but there's only so far you can go with that. The other problem we had was when you revealed the secret of his father killing his uncle at the beginning, you're just waiting the whole movie just to find out, wait for T'Challa to find out, but you already know. And we realized during the director's cut, that was kind of a death wish. And you really want to put the audience in the main character's shoes and find out with him. So one of the tasks I had was to take bits of that first scene and implement it into a later scene when he finds out. So we hold off on the reveal at the beginning. And that was a lot of fun for me, because I basically get to cut 2 different time eras like they were in the same room, but they really weren't. So just as an editor, it was a lot of fun. But the other one that for me personally, I find, I don't know about everybody else here, but I find that my biggest obstacle on these movies is myself in a lot of ways. And I find that there's always self-doubt. Whenever you always want to take that self-worth out of the work you do, but it's so hard because you put yourself in, and you put your experiences in, and your whole life in. And on these movies, sometimes you can't wait for your process. You have to kind of shift it a touch. So, and to kind of go back to the interconnectedness of this universe, I got a call from our producer one morning, and he said, "Hey, we need you to cut this scene by tonight because we need to wrap the set for Infinity War." And it was the throne room. It was T'Challa's throne room. And I said, "Yeah, sure." And then I completely panicked, obviously, and had to figure out what to do, because there was about 8 to 10 hours of footage for this one scene. And it was a scene where T'Challa and Killmonger meet face to face, which theme-wise, essentially when Ryan was writing, was the 2 sides of his ideologies meeting for the first time, and there's information that people know and all this stuff. And I kind of went through this whole panic moment of am I good enough? Can I do this? I after a second I took a deep breath and remembered what, you know, the advice we got from other people, and, you know, trusting myself and protecting Ryan and all that. And I just started watching footage, and I completely put myself. I just bought some really comfortable UGG slippers, little things when you edit, right? But like, and I sat back in my chair and I just took everything in. And the first, I did this huge laugh out loud when Killmonger says, "Hey, Auntie," to Ramonda, and it was one of the biggest involuntary laughs I've ever had editing. And Mike had kind of thought that up, and it was this moment of comedy. And you know, there's always this challenge of balancing comedy and drama when you're in basically the scene where the elastic band has been twisted and twisted and twisted, and this is the scene where you're just going to let it go and everything's going to go crazy, where the whole movie changes. But when I laughed at that, I realized that it was so in tune with what was happening in the drama, and I sort of just let the actors tell me where to go, and I let you know, Ryan's changing of the scenes and the lines let me know where to go. So in a way, I removed all of what was up here in my head of what I needed to do, my process, and how to figure out how to cut the scene, and I trusted my gut and my soul, but also the team that was giving me something, and it was this weird relationship with the movie, and you know, it was terrifying, but you know, much like Dan, I like to go in and just kind of watch a movie with the audience, and that was the biggest laugh in the movie. That was one of the, you know, because the emotion went from very tense and to this laugh moment, which was a release, but then right back to tense. And I don't know, just something about that you know, and to kind of go back, I'll just end with the other question about what, you know, what would surprise people, is that there's no list of qualifications as an editor aside from knowing how to use an Avid, right? Or like how non-linear editing works, the basics. Like like there's no, oh, I have to know this before I undertake this kind of thing. And I think, you know, the process is really, you know, working on a Marvel movie, you know, learning that I could do it was the biggest surprise to me, you know, and being open. And I think everybody in this room kind of comes from a place, at least from what I can tell, of, you know, kind of believing that everyone else in the room is smarter than them, at least when in the interactions in the meetings. So, you know, coming from a place of not knowing as opposed to knowing, and being able to learn and grow and evolve these movies, you know, because you know, to be honest, the executives are the same way. And that's the sort of culture that, you know, all you guys were on the path to, you know, allow us to do that sort of thing. But just trusting yourself, you know, and knowing that you can try and fail, because that's the only way you're gonna figure things out.
Perfect. Okay. Last but not least, Peter.
I have to follow all that. Come on.
You got the most time, so this is it. Your moment to shine.
Does it have to be a scene from a Marvel movie? No, I'm teasing.
It'd be a little awkward if it weren't, but I'll leave it up to you.
Better be good,
Peter. What's that?
Better be good. You've had time.
It's not going to be nearly as good as all this. But, you know, Jeff sort of touched on it a little bit earlier. The third act in Iron Man 3, you know, the big fight at the port was a bit challenging because for many reasons, mostly because while Robert started shooting that scene, he broke his ankle. And so we had a little bit of Robert, all the second unit plates, and they were going to come back and shoot Robert 6 or 8 weeks later when he healed to shoot the rest of that. And so it sort of evolved. I had to put it together because we had to start post-visiting it and putting the suits in there and trying to figure out where, you know, who was arriving when and where. There were moments where, you know, Kevin would walk into my room with a picture of a suit and go, we have to find the stunt for this suit to do. And I'd go through the material that was already shot and try to find, you know, okay, well, that suit does this. All right, he should be here and he can do this and react with this. So there was a lot of sort of, I don't know, a lot of sort of making stuff out of things that weren't really intended to do that. And for me, that challenge is sort of fun. And then when we finally were able to incorporate Robert into the scene, it sort of brought the scene full circle, because he sort of, obviously, you know, it was a scene about him and Rhodey and how they, you know, how they dealt with the problems at the port. And so once we had them to sort of cement the scene and sort of wrap the scene around it, it sort of came together. So that was sort of a fun process for me.
Well, those were all excellent answers, as they were throughout the panel. As we bring things to a close, I want to start by thanking Mr. Ford for brilliantly shouldering the load of the hosting duties. That was wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. I know it
Oh
was
my
a
God,
lot of
you're
work.
welcome. It's an honor.
Look at the admiration from your peers.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, here's the thing. Last thing I'm say is that the best part of working at Marvel is the people on this screen, in that I got to meet them and work with them. I mean, I almost hate to admit how much fun it is working with these people and all the other people that we work with there, because then people be like, well, you get paid for that too. But no, it's the people and the relationships that we get to form when we're making these movies that really what makes it worthwhile, only because that's what you really take with you. And of course, we're proud of the work. And I know everybody on this panel is immensely proud of the work they did, and and for the fans. Yeah. So anyway, well, thank you all. This was so fun.
Yeah, and that camaraderie certainly came through. For everybody watching at home, clearly these folks are all very busy and have a lot going on. For them to take this amount of time with us today is really special. And the other thing I would remind everybody of is that they're all uniquely gifted and talented storytellers in their own right. We could have done an hour-long panel with each one of them, and have in some cases, and will in the future too. So wherever you are, join me in thanking them for their efforts, their time, and the brilliant work that they've done. Thank you all for joining us. We will try and make this on demand later on, in case you came in late or you have a friend that missed it. And a shameless plug, some of these folks I have interviewed before, and they're available in our Rough Cut podcast. So you want to check that out. And those that haven't been on it yet, they will, if I have anything to say about it. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, panelists. It was wonderful. It was a long road to get here, but it was a blast. So stay safe, everybody, and we'll see you back here again next time.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.